disclaimer. Before we start, a quick note that this episode is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Food and nutrition should supplement healthy lifestyle habits but are not a substitute for professional medical diagnosis or treatment. Welcome to DeadSet History Podcast, where history gets checked. Today, we are going to discuss the hidden history, trade routes, and biochemical secret cheat codes behind your favorite Indian dishes.
It's just so great to dive into this with you today, because we are going to look at traditional Indian food in a way that, well, you've probably never really considered before.
Yeah, we're definitely not just looking at it as comfort food today.
Exactly. Not just as, your weekend takeout or even just as cultural heritage. We are basically looking at it as ancient biohacking technology that's just like disguised as your dinner.
Right, because what if I told you that basically everything you think you know about where your favorite Indian foods come from is completely backwards?
It's a total mind bender.
It really is.
Yeah.
Like, what if I told you the samosa isn't actually Indian? Or that your grandmother's garlic chicken curry is essentially a microscopic hazmat suit designed to flush environmental heavy metals out of your brain?
Oh, I love that hazmat suit analogy so much.
We're going to get deep into that later.
Yeah.
But today, for you listening, we are hacking your dinner plate. We are taking this massive stack of sources. We've got culinary archaeology, ethnopharmacology research, historical travelogues, and we're going to decode the brilliant centuries-old science that is just hiding in plain sight.
And as the resident science nerd here, the thing that absolutely blew my mind going through this material is that the way these foods were historically prepared is essentially high-level molecular chemistry.
Literally. It's wild.
Right. Like the ancient cooks who developed these recipes intuitively solved these massively complex physiological bottlenecks. Bottlenecks that, modern pharmacologists are still spending billions of dollars trying to replicate in sterile labs today.
So if you're listening to this deep dive, get ready. Because we are going to extract the absolute best nuggets of insight from these sources.
Oh, yeah, we're going all the way in.
We're going to trace how indigenous nutritional philosophy like Ayurveda basically collided with transcontinental trade and empirical bioprocessing, and how that created a food system that is just uniquely resilient.
So where do we even begin with a stack this big?
Let's start by checking some history on arguably the most iconic, quintessential Indian street food of all time. We got to talk about the samosa.
Oh, the ultimate comfort snack. For most people, when they hear the word samosa, they immediately picture that crispy, golden, deep-fried, triangular pastry, usually packed to the absolute brim with spiced potatoes and peas.
Which, makes perfect sense because that is exactly what it is today.
Right.
But if we pull back the historical curtain, the original samosa possessed this wild transcontinental heritage that spans well over 1,000 years. It didn't start in India.
That is the craziest part.
And it wasn't even vegetarian. It actually started on the rugged, literally freezing trails of the ancient Silk Road.
See, that completely shatters the modern perception of it for me. Because the Silk Road was brutal.
Oh, absolutely brutal.
You're talking about massive, dangerous networks of trade routes connecting the East and West. So how does a delicate, deep-fried potato pocket fit into a merchant caravan?
It doesn't. And that is the brilliance of its actual origin. If we look at the linguistic and the culinary roots, the word itself traces back to the Iranian sambosag.
Samosag, okay.
Yeah, and a sambosag in the 10th century was not deep-fried, and it certainly it did not contain any potatoes.
Because potatoes weren't even a thing there yet, right?
Exactly. It was a small triangular stuffed pastry that acted as the favored travel snack of merchants moving across Central Asia and the Middle East. Like, if you comb through these 10th to 13th century Arab culinary treatises, you see variations of the name popping up literally everywhere. Samsa, Thanbusak, Semposak.
So they were essentially the original protein bars of the ancient world.
That's exactly what they were. They were filled with heavily spiced minced meat and fat.
Oh, wow. Lots of calories for the road.
Tons of calories. And they were designed to be cooked quickly over crude campfires or just baked in these small clay ovens. But the key is they were specifically engineered structurally so they could be tossed into saddlebags for these long, grueling journeys across the steppes without falling apart.
From a logistical standpoint, that is a stroke of absolute genius.
Right.
Because if you are traversing the Silk Road, you need something compact and intensely nutrient-dense. Meat spoils quickly, But if you cook it with antimicrobial spices and wrap it in its own protective, edible casing, you've basically created a shelf-stable ration.
A literal medieval MRE.
Yeah. The pastry acts as a physical barrier against dust, insects, and, immediate oxidation of the fats inside.
And what really fascinates me is how this rugged survival food eventually transitioned into high society luxury.
Because it definitely didn't stain the saddlebags.
No, it got a major glow-up. The Iranian historian Abul Fazl Behaki, he wrote about these pastries in his 11th century work, the Tarikh-i Behagi.
Okay, bring the historical receipts. I like it.
Always. And he described the sambosa not as a saddlebag ration, but as a dainty delicacy that was served in the royal courts of the Ghaznavid Empire.
So the merchants basically brought the concept to the major cities, and the royal chefs were like, oh, we can elevate this.
Exactly.
But how does it eventually make the jump down into the Indian subcontinent?
Yeah.
Because it's a long way from Central Asia to Delhi.
It comes down to mass migration and, honestly, the search for wealthy patrons. During the 13th and 14th centuries, you had highly skilled cooks from the Middle East and Central Asia migrating southward, seeking really lucrative employment in the booming kitchens of the Delhi Sultanate.
Going where the money was.
Exactly. And they brought their beloved sambosag with them. By the year 1300 CE, the famous scholar and court poet Amir Khusrau noted that the royal court of Delhi absolutely devoured samosas prepared from meat, ghee, and onions.
I love that we have actual historical documentation for this. It's not just guesswork.
Oh, we have the best receipt of all coming up. A few decades after Amir Khusrau, the legendary Moroccan explorer Ibn Battuta arrives on the scene.
Oh, Ibn Battuta, the guy went everywhere.
Literally basically traveled the entire known world. So he attended a massive banquet at the court of Sultan Mohammed bin Tughlaq. And in his writings, he describes eating samoshak, or sambusak. But this wasn't campfire food anymore.
What was in it?
He describes this delicate pastry stuffed with highly seasoned minced meat, almonds, pistachios, and walnuts.
Oh, wow.
Right? And it was served as an appetizer just before the lavish rice courses.
That sounds incredibly rich. Like, minced meat and pistachios in a pastry is a far cry from the accessible potato-stuffed street food we know today. It sounds like something only an emperor could actually afford.
Which sets us up for a massive 16th century plot twist. The defining structural transformation of the samosa, the reason you and I know it as a potato dish today, only happens because of European maritime expansion.
Wait, really?
Specifically, the Portuguese.
Ah, okay. The Columbian Exchange in action.
Yes. So Portuguese traders arrive on the western coast of India, and they bring with them a treasure trove of botanical oddities from the New World. And most importantly for our story, they introduce the potato, which they called batata.
It is wild to think about that because Indian cuisine today is so inextricably linked to the potato. Like, it feels ancient.
It feels like it's always been there.
Exactly. Yet it's a relatively recent botanical introduction, historically speaking.
And Indian cooks have always been just brilliantly adaptable. They look at this newly introduced tuber, and they have a massive light bulb moment. They realize they can completely replace the highly expensive minced meat and imported nut fillings of the royal sambusa with boiled, spiced mashed potatoes and garden peas.
Oh, that's so smart.
Yeah, they throw in their own regional aromatics, cumin, coriander, ginger, asafoetida, and boom, the dish is fundamentally re-engineered.
And completely democratized, right? By swapping out expensive meats and nuts for cheap, easily cultivated tubers and legumes, they basically took a dish historically reserved for royal banquets and turned it into a hyper-accessible, mass-market street food.
And it sparked a localized culinary explosion. Because it was so cheap to make now, every region put its own spin on it.
Like what kind of variations?
So if you go to northern India today, you get that dense, heavy, almost craggy, triangular pastry packed with coarsely mashed potatoes and peas. But if you travel over to eastern India, you find the singara.
Oh, I've had singara. It's amazing.
It's so good. The singara has a much lighter crust laced with asafoetida, and they stuff it with tiny diced, not mashed potatoes, cauliflower florets, and raw peanuts.
That texture difference is key.
Right. And then down in Gujarat, they make the padi samosa using these paper-thin dough sheets so it literally shatters when you bite into it. And in Hyderabad, the lukmi actually retains that medieval Central Asian legacy.
Wait, how so?
It's a square, flaky pastry that is still stuffed with spiced minced meat.
What's fascinating about that whole evolutionary timeline is how the physical architecture of the food, a portable stuffed dough, remained perfectly intact, while the biological contents inside the dough were entirely rewritten based on shifting global agricultural trade routes.
It's like updating the software but keeping the hardware the same.
Exactly.
Speaking of shifting historical narratives, we have to talk about one of my favorite historical controversies in the stack,
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
the great Idli and Dosa debate.
Yes.
For anyone listening who hasn't had the pleasure, Idlis are these incredibly soft, fluffy, steamed rice and lentil cakes. They're usually served steaming hot with sambar and coconut chutney. And dosas are made from a very similar fermented batter, but they are spread out onto a hot griddle into paper-thin, crispy crepes.
They're the absolute undeniable bedrock of South Indian cuisine.
Yeah.
And I have to say they're also profound microbiological marvels, but we'll get to the science of that in a minute.
We will definitely get into the microbes. But as the historian, what is the controversy here?
Wait, you're the historian, tell me.
Right. The controversy is over whether these dishes are actually indigenous to India at all.
Which is a crazy thing to suggest.
The renowned food historian K.T. Achaya dropped a massive bombshell theory a few decades ago, suggesting that the modern idli actually originated in medieval Indonesia.
Indonesia. That's a huge claim to make about South India's most famous dish. What was his evidence for that?
So he leaned heavily on the writings of the 7th century Chinese Buddhist monk Xuanzang. Now, Xuanzang traveled extensively throughout India documenting society, and he explicitly noted that India, at that specific time, possessed no dedicated steaming vessels in their kitchens.
So you can't have steamed idli without a steamer.
Exactly. Achaya pointed out that Indonesia, on the other hand, had deep ancient historical expertise in steamed and fermented foods. He pointed to Indonesian dishes that are morphologically identical to the modern idli, like the kedli, which is a fluffy steamed cake, and the bura, which is a steamed coconut milk rice cake.
Okay, so he's basically suggesting a direct technology transfer, like the hardware and the software of the recipe were imported.
Exactly. The Chola Empire, which dominated South India, had massive maritime trade links with the Indonesian archipelago. So Achaya theorized that cooks working for Hindu royal courts in East Asia learned these advanced batter fermentation and steaming technologies, and then simply transferred them back to southern India sometime between the 8th and 12th centuries AD.
I mean, if you zoom out, that makes logical sense, right? Culinary techniques travel along trade routes just as easily as spices and textiles do.
Totally.
But I'm guessing South Indian culinary historians did not take kindly to this theory.
Oh, they pushed back heavily, and they brought receipts from ancient indigenous texts to prove it.
What did they find?
They pointed to the Kannada text, Vidar Han, written by Sivakodacharya way back in 920 AD. It explicitly mentions a dish called Idli.
Okay, that sounds like idli.
And then, in 1130 AD, you have the Sanskrit Encyclopedia Mansalasa, compiled by King Sameshvara III. That text details a dish called idarika, made by pouring ground pulse paste into shallow molds and steaming it.
Wait, hold on. Let me stop you there because my science brain is flashing red right now.
Oh, what's wrong?
If those ancient texts from the 10th and 12th centuries mention a steamed pulse paste, what about the fermentation? Because modern idli and dosa are fundamentally defined by their overnight fermentation. Like, that is what gives them their fluffiness and their sour tang.
That is the exact detail that pivots the whole historical debate. The ancient texts up to the 12th century describe these batters as being cooked immediately after grinding, without any intentional fermentation.
No fermentation at all.
None. They were using pure, unfermented black gram, known locally as urad dal, or mixing it with raw rice and just throwing it straight onto the fire.
Okay, this is where the history completely collides with the physics of cooking.
How so?
Because if you just take raw lentils and rice, grind them up with some water, and try to steam it or fry it without a binding agent like gluten, or without the aeration that comes from yeast or bacterial fermentation, you are going to get a dense, heavy, completely unpalatable brick.
A brick.
Yes. It would be like eating a hockey puck. How on earth did ancient cooks make these early idlis and dosas stick together before they figured out fermentation?
That is the million-dollar question. I read that part of the text and thought, they must have been eating gravel. How did they do it?
They did it by relying on the highly specific structural biochemistry of the urad dal itself.
Wait, the lentil has its own biochemistry hack?
Yes. This is where ancient cooks were practicing brilliant, intuitive chemistry without even realizing it. Black gram, or urad dal, contains incredibly unique mucilaginous polysaccharides. Specifically, we're talking about arabinogalactan polymers.
Okay, arabinogalactan polymers. That's a mouthful. Let's break that down for the listener. What does that actually mean for the cook standing over a stone grinder?
Think of these polymers as microscopic, sticky nets hiding inside the lentil. When you grind urad dal with water, these surface-active proteins and arabinogalactan polymers unravel.
Okay.
They hydrate and create a highly viscous, thick gel. It's essentially natural, edible glue.
Edible glue. That sounds
Right.
appetizing.
But imagine a 10th century cook mechanically grinding these lentils by hand using a heavy stone grinder. It's super labor intensive. As they grind, this mucilaginous gel forms and it traps the tiny air bubbles being mechanically beaten into the paste.
So the grinding itself is aerating it a tiny bit.
Exactly. Furthermore, it acts as a structural binder, grabbing onto the coarse, raw rice particles and holding the entire matrix together.
Wow. So even without bacteria producing gas to fluff it up or gluten to give it elasticity, the natural sticky proteins in this specific lentil created just enough of a biological scaffolding to make a cohesive flatbread or a steamed disc.
Exactly. It allowed ancient cooks to produce dense, thick flatbreads, which were the original dosai on flat earthenware or stone griddles, without requiring any bioleavening whatsoever.
That's wild.
But as you can imagine from the physics we just discussed, these were heavy, incredibly dense dishes. They were sustenance, not necessarily delicacies. It wasn't until a few centuries later, roughly between the 13th to 15th centuries, that the modern technique of overnight natural ambient fermentation gained widespread formal adoption in the region.
And the transition to intentional fermentation basically changed everything. It took this dense, heavy dosai and turned it into the paper-thin, crispy modern dosa. It transformed the heavy, brick-like ancient idlage into the airy, porous, cloud-like sponge we know as the modern Italy.
And we will actually dive deep into the exact microbiology of that fermentation later in the deep dive, because the bacteria involved are performing absolute magic.
They really are. But for now, I want to take us from the coastal south up to the opulent imperial Mughal courts of the north. We need to talk about biryani.
Oh yes, biryani, the absolute thermodynamics of royal dining.
The name itself kind of gives away its origins, if you know where to look. Biryani derives from the Persian words biryan, which translates to fried or roasted before cooking, and barinj, which simply means rice.
So it's literally just roasted rice.
At its core, yes. Today, it's the ultimate celebratory dish, right? Complex layers of parboiled long-grain basmati rice, heavily marinated meat, rich aromatics, saffron, and clarified butter, or ghee.
But the Persian root suggests it traveled. How did it make its way to the subcontinent and become so deeply embedded in Indian culture?
Well, historians generally point to three distinct pathways. And honestly, they probably all happen simultaneously.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is military. The Turk-Mongol conqueror Timur may have brought a very primitive, rugged version of it down into India around 1398. Because for an advancing army, a one-pot meal of rice and meat is a highly efficient campaign ration.
That makes total sense. Logistics win wars.
Exactly. The second pathway is via Arab maritime traders who were settling along the southwestern Malabar coast.
And the third?
The most famous and enduring historiographical narrative centers on the Mughal imperial kitchens. Specifically, it centers on Empress Mumtaz Mahal in the early 17th century.
Wait, the same Mumtaz Mahal for whom the Taj Mahal was built?
The very same.
No way!
Yeah, the legend goes that she was inspecting the imperial army barracks one afternoon, and she was horrified. She noticed the soldiers looked severely undernourished and fatigued.
Ah, so she stepped in.
She immediately instructed the royal chefs to formulate a single highly nutritious, perfectly balanced meal that combined heavy animal protein, complex carbohydrates, and rich fats to restore the troops' vitality.
That's a pretty intense royal mandate.
And the result of that mandate was the incredible refinement of biryani, utilizing a highly specific cooking technique called dum put.
And this technique is an absolute masterclass in food physics. I mean, dum put literally translates from Persian as baking or breathing in a sealed environment.
Right, so the chefs would take a heavy clay pot called a handi. They would meticulously layer the marinated raw meat at the bottom, cover it with the parboiled rice, add the spices and ghee, and then they would seal the lid shut using a thick, sticky strip of raw wheat dough known as ati kiloi.
That dough seal is crucial.
Yeah, they'd press the dough around the rim so it formed an airtight seal, and then they would bury the entire pot in low, smoldering charcoal embers.
By doing that, those Mughal chefs essentially invented the slow pressure cooker centuries before modern manufacturing.
That's insane to think about.
It really is. Let's break down the thermodynamics of what is actually happening inside that sealed clay handy. Because they sealed the perimeter with that thick wheat dough, absolutely none of the internal moisture can escape.
Okay, so it's trapped.
Exactly. As the pot heats up over those low embers, the water from the raw meat and the yogurt marinade begins to evaporate and turns into steam. Because the steam has nowhere to go, it increases the micropressure inside the vessel.
So the pot literally becomes a pressurized environment. What does that actually do to the food?
This elevated pressure alters the boiling point of the water inside. It allows the cooking environment to stay hot enough to break down the tough connective tissue, the collagen in the meat, slowly melting it into rich, luxurious gelatin.
That's how you get that meat that just melts in your mouth.
Exactly. And this is the absolute crucial part of the physics, because it is a low, slow, sealed heat. The temperature never spikes high enough to destroy or boil off the highly volatile essential oils from the delicate spices they used.
Spices like cardamom, cloves, cinnamon, and bay leaves.
Right. If you boil those spices rapidly in an open pot, the aromatic compounds just evaporate into the air. The kitchen smells great, but the food loses its punch. In a dumb cup environment, the aroma stays completely locked into the dish.
It has literally nowhere else to go.
Exactly. Concurrently, the parboiled rice grains act like thousands of little microscopic sponges. Through capillary action, they slowly absorb the spice-infused fat and the gelatinous meat juices. The result is a texture where each individual grain of rice remains separate, elongated, and intensely aromatic, rather than turning into a mushy porridge. It is an absolute masterpiece of thermal engineering.
And the Mughals, being the Mughals, they didn't stop at thermal engineering. They also dabbled in ancient biohacking with their garnishes.
Oh yes, I know what you're talking about.
They would often coat the finished biryani or even individual grains of royal rice with a substance called vark.
Edible silver foil.
Literally pounding pure elemental silver into microscopic gossamer thin sheets and just eating it.
Which sounds completely crazy today.
Right. But the Mughal emperors and their court physicians believed that ingesting actual silver possessed immense health benefits. They thought it had antimicrobial properties, stimulated digestion, and acted as a powerful metabolic aphrodisiac. It was the ultimate imperial flex, eating precious metals for health.
The wealth and the science of the era all on one plate. But it's important to remember that not all great culinary innovations come from intentional engineering or royal mandates. Some of the most iconic dishes in history came from complete panic-inducing kitchen accidents. Right?
Which perfectly brings us to sambar.
Yes.
If you ask almost anyone today, they will tell you sambar is the quintessential Tamil dish. It is utterly synonymous with South India. But popular culinary tradition and historical records suggest it was actually accidentally invented in the 17th century in the Maratha court of Thanjavur, which was a kingdom ruled by a Marathi-speaking dynasty in what is now modern-day Tamil Nadu.
So you have a geographic and cultural collision happening right in the kitchen.
Exactly. The story goes that King Sambhaji, who was the son of the famous Maratha ruler Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, was an avid cook.
A king who cooked.
Yeah, he loved spending time in the royal kitchens. One day, he was trying to prepare a traditional dish called amti. Amti is a thin, sour Maharashtrian lentil stew that gets its signature tartness from a dried food called kokum.
Kokum, which is botanically Garcinia indica. It's very common on the western coast of India, the Western Ghats, but not necessarily native to the deep south.
Right, so he was in Thanjavur, far from his ancestral home, and the royal kitchen completely ran out of kokum.
Oh, no.
The king is cooking, the main souring agent is gone, and he has to improvise. He grabs a completely local indigenous ingredient, tamarind pulp, and swaps it in for the kokum. He adds this to a boiled base of pigeon peas or tur dal, and then infuses it with local southern spices, roasted coconut, and curry leaves.
Just winging it.
Totally winging it. He serves it to the court, and they absolutely love it. They're obsessed. They name the new dish sambar in honor of King Sambhaji.
That is brilliant. An emergency ingredient substitution driven by supply chain issues basically birthed an entire culinary category.
Now, in the interest of historical rigor, I should note that some modern historians argue this is a simplified royal legend. They suggest that the dish likely evolved gradually over centuries of synthesis between Maratha rulers and local Tamil communities.
Sure, reality is usually a bit messier than the legend.
But either way, it highlights a profound truth. Trade routes, migration, and simple kitchen economics shape what we eat far more than intentional invention. which perfectly sets up the story of Khichdi, a dish that has weathered 5,000 years of history.
5 millennia. That is staggering. Very few things in human culture survive for 5,000 years, let alone a specific recipe.
It really is wild. Archaeological evidence shows that the practice of combining rice and mung beans in a single pot dates all the way back to the Indus Valley civilization.
Wow.
The name itself comes from the ancient Sanskrit word kika, meaning a dish of rice and pulses, and it has stubbornly survived and evolved through every single era of Indian history. In the 14th century, our old friend Ibn Battuta noted that the locals ate it every single morning for breakfast. It was the food of the masses.
But did it stay a peasant dish?
Oh, absolutely not. The Mughals got their hands on it and elevated it to ridiculous heights. The Emperor Jahangir loved a hyper-rich version loaded with pistachios, raisins, and exotic spices. He literally named his version Lazizan, which translates to the delicious.
Very humble name.
Right. But it gets crazier. In the 19th century courts of Awadh, the royal chefs were so determined to flex their wealth and skill that they made a version of Khichdi without any grain at all.
Wait, how do you make a rice and lentil dish without rice and lentils?
Painstaking manual labor. They literally hand-carved individual almonds to look exactly like grains of rice and carved pistachios to look exactly like split lentils.
You've got to be kidding me.
I am not. Did they cook these thousands of carved nuts in pure ghee and spices? It was culinary trompe-l'oeil.
That is just absurd decadence. The amount of time that would take is mind-boggling.
Is. But underneath all that royal pomp and psychological posturing, Khichdi has always remained the ultimate Indian comfort food. In classical Ayurvedic texts like the Charaka Samhita, it's considered the foundational restorative meal. And I want to ask you, as our science expert, why is Khichdi universally seen, across 5,000 years and dozens of empires, as the ultimate healing food? What is the actual biology happening in the gut?
It comes down to 2 major biochemical factors: amino acid profiles and digestive workload.
Okay, let's break those down.
When you combine a cereal grain like rice with a pulse like moong dal, you perform a nutritional magic trick. Let's look at the proteins. Rice is very low in an essential amino acid called lysine, but it's high in another one called methionine.
Okay.
Lentils are the exact opposite. They're high in lysine, but very low in methionine.
So on their own, neither is a complete protein.
Exactly. But when you cook them and eat them together in a single pot, they perfectly complement each other to create a complete protein profile. They provide all the essential amino acids your body needs to rebuild muscle and tissue, identical to eating a piece of meat, but entirely plant-based.
So it's highly efficient fuel.
Yes.
But that doesn't explain why it's a sick day food. Like, why is Khichdi the famously easy-on-the-stomach meal? Why is it the first solid food given to babies, or the meal your mother makes you when you're recovering from a severe flu?
That is because of the specific legume used. Khichdi traditionally uses mung beans, or mung dal. Mung beans are exceptionally low in flatulence-causing oligosaccharides compared to almost any other bean, like chickpeas or kidney beans.
Oligosaccharides being the things that make you bloated.
Right. Oligosaccharides are complex, bulky sugars that the human body fundamentally lacks the enzymes to break down in the stomach or small intestine.
So what happens to them?
They pass intact into the large intestine, where your gut bacteria ferment them, causing massive amounts of gas, bloating, and discomfort.
Ah, the classic bean problem.
Exactly. Because mung dal is so incredibly low in these complex sugars, it requires a very little metabolic energy to digest. Think about it. When you are sick, your body wants to direct all of its available metabolic energy toward your immune system to fight off the virus. It does not want to waste energy trying to break down a heavy, complex meal. Khichdi provides complete, readily available cellular nutrition with absolute minimal digestive taxation.
Okay, that makes so much sense. And it's the perfect pivot point for us. We've talked about royal courts and ancient texts, but I want to dive even deeper into the microscopic level now.
Let's do it.
Let's look at how these historical dishes actually interact with our cellular biology. I want to talk about biohacking with spices, specifically the turmeric pepper axis.
This is one of my favorite topics because this is where traditional cooking intuitively maps onto modern pharmacokinetics in a way that is just beautiful.
Let's set the stage for the listener. Turmeric is absolutely everywhere right now. Like
Yeah.
if you go to a trendy cafe in Los Angeles or London, you see turmeric lattes, raw turmeric water, turmeric wellness shots. It is aggressively marketed as a miracle anti-inflammatory.
Oh, it's a huge industry.
But according to the pharmacological research in our stack, drinking raw turmeric water gives you less than a 2% absorption rate. It basically does almost nothing. Why is there such a massive bioavailability bottleneck? If it's a superfood, why can't our bodies absorb it?
To understand this, we need to talk about liver enzymes. But to make it intuitive, I like to use what I call the nightclub bouncer analogy.
Okay, I love this. Walk me through it.
Imagine your bloodstream, your systemic circulation is the hottest, most exclusive VIP nightclub in town. Curcumin, which is the magical bioactive anti-inflammatory compound hiding inside the turmeric root, desperately wants to get into that club to do its healing work.
So curcumin is the VIP guest.
Yes. So you swallow your trendy, overpriced turmeric water, and the curcumin travels down into your intestines, trying to get through the door into your bloodstream.
Sounds easy enough. It's in the gut. It just needs to cross over.
But the club has very, very aggressive bouncers. Your intestinal walls and your liver are heavily lined with phase 2 metabolic enzymes. Specifically, we are talking about UDP glucuronosyltransferases, or UGTs for short, and sulfyltransferases, or SLTs.
The bouncers.
The bouncers. Their entire biological job is to identify foreign fat-soluble compounds floating through the digestive tract, tag them, and throw them out of the body before they can accumulate.
Even the good stuff.
They don't care that curcumin is anti-inflammatory, they just see a strange foreign chemical. When curcumin tries to enter the bloodstream, the UGT bouncers instantly grab it and slap a massive sugar molecule onto it in a metabolic process called glucuronidation.
A sugar molecule.
Yeah. This essentially handcuffs the curcumin. It makes it water-soluble so your kidneys can immediately flush it down the toilet.
Wow, so it never even reaches the bloodstream.
It happens so incredibly fast, what pharmacologists call rapid metabolic clearance, that less than 2% of the raw curcumin you ingest ever actually makes it to the VIP room of your systemic circulation.
That is a tragic flaw in the biology. So all these wellness influencers drinking raw turmeric water are essentially just giving their UGT bouncers a quick microscopic workout before flushing their money away.
Exactly, unless they employ a highly specific biochemical hack, a hack which ancient Indian cooks figured out centuries ago.
The pepper hack.
Yes. Introduce black pepper into the equation. Black pepper contains a highly active, potent alkaloid called piperine. If curcumin is the VIP guest trying to get in, piperine is a highly trained security guard you hire to distract the bouncers.
Wait, how does a compound in black pepper distract a liver enzyme?
When you eat piperine alongside curcumin, the piperine acts as a competitive inhibitor. It goes straight up to those UGT and SLT enzymes in the intestinal wall and the liver. It also targets another major metabolic enzyme called cytochrome P450-3A4.
Okay, that's a lot of enzymes.
Right, but the piperine essentially wrestles all those bouncers to the ground. It physically blocks the glucuronidation pathway. It prevents those enzymes from handcuffing the curcumin.
So the bouncers are completely distracted, and the VIP curcumin just walks right through the front door into the bloodstream.
Precisely. And the pharmacokinetic data on this synergy is absolutely staggering. By adding just a tiny fractional amount of piperine, about 20 milligrams alongside the curcumin, you block the clearance mechanisms enough to create a 2,000% surge in curcumin's systemic bioavailability.
Wait, let me repeat that so it sinks in for the listener. A 2,000% increase. A 20x surge in absorption just by adding a pinch of black pepper.
Just by adding black pepper, it spikes the peak serum concentration in the blood phenomenally. And what's truly amazing is that traditional Indian cooking almost never uses turmeric in isolation. It is virtually always paired with black pepper or other piperine-containing spices in curries, rasam, and everyday spice blends.
They just knew.
The ancient cooks intuitively figured out this exact pharmaceutical synergy centuries before modern lab testing even knew what an enzyme was.
That is literal physiological biohacking. They were creating combination therapies in a clay pot. But they didn't stop there, because the way they actually cook these spices involves another layer of physics that completely bypasses the liver altogether. I want to talk about the technique of Tadka.
Ah, yes. Thermal cell wall lysis. I love this part.
Let me explain Tadka for anyone who hasn't cooked Indian food. It's also known as chonk, bagar, or tempering. It is a fundamental foundational technique in Indian cooking. You take a fat medium like mustard oil, sesame oil, or ghee, and you heat it up very high in a small metal pan.
Very high heat.
Right. Once it's shimmering hot, you drop whole raw spices into the fat mustard seeds, cumin, dried chilies, turmeric powder, and they instantly sizzle, pop, and bloom, releasing this intoxicating smell. Then you take that sizzling aromatic oil and you pour it directly over your cooked dal or vegetables right before serving.
To a chef, it sounds like a brilliant flavor enhancement technique, which it is, but therapeutically, biochemically, it is a profound drug delivery mechanism.
Break down the thermodynamics and the biology of what is happening in that tiny hot pan.
Well, first, you are dealing with intense, localized high heat, usually between 150 to 180 degrees Celsius. When you drop raw, dried seeds into that hot lipid, the extreme heat causes thermal cell wall lysis.
Thermal cell wall lysis.
It rapidly ruptures the rigid cellular structures of the spices, essentially popping them like microscopic water balloons. This volatilizes the essential oils stored in their microscopic channels, so boom, massive flavor release.
Okay, that explains the smell.
But more importantly, for our health, we have to look at the solubility of the molecules involved.
Solubility, what do you mean by that?
Key phytochemicals like curcumin in turmeric, piperine in pepper, or beta-carotene in chilies are highly hydrophobic. They absolutely hate water.
So they repel it.
Exactly. They will not dissolve in a water-based soup or a raw juice, but they love fat. They are lipophilic. When you heat them in hot ghee or oil, the lipids act as a solvent. The hot fat actively dissolves these active compounds, pulling them out of the raw, woody spice matrix and stabilizing them in a liquid oil emulsion.
Okay, so the good stuff is now completely trapped in the fat. But why does the fat matter once it gets into our bodies? Why is eating a spoonful of spiced ghee better than just eating the raw spice powder?
Because of how the human digestive tract absorbs dietary fat. This is the ultimate hack. When you consume these bioactive spices embedded in a fat matrix, your body breaks that fat down into tiny microscopic bubbles in the gut called micelles.
Micelles, okay.
These lipid curcumin micelles are absorbed by your intestines. Yeah. But here is the trick. Water-soluble nutrients go straight to the liver through the portal vein where the remaining bouncers are waiting to filter them out. Fats, however, are absorbed into the lymphatic system through specialized vessels called lacteals.
Wait, are you saying the fats bypass the liver entirely?
They bypass the portal vein's first-pass hepatic metabolism entirely. They literally slip through the back door. The lymphatic system carries these fat droplets up through the body and dumps them directly into the bloodstream near the heart, completely bypassing the liver's initial filtration.
That is genius.
By using hot fat to extract the curcumin and piperine to block the enzymes, Tadka is a highly engineered, dual-action lipid delivery system for hydrophobic molecules.
It is just completely wild to think that a grandmother standing over a stove in a village doing a quick Tadka for her family's dinner is effortlessly executing a molecular bypass protocol that modern pharmaceutical companies spend billions of dollars trying to replicate in pill form.
It really makes you reconsider the brilliance of domestic ancestral knowledge, and it doesn't just stop at nutrient absorption, which brings us to an entirely different, incredibly relevant biological defense mechanism hidden in these recipes.
Exactly. Because it's one thing to absorb nutrients efficiently, it's another thing entirely to actively defend the human body against cellular toxins. I want to pivot from how ancient recipes feed us to how they hold up against 21st century threats, specifically the insidious threat of urban pollution.
This is a major modern health crisis. If you live in a city, you are constantly exposed to environmental pollutants through industrial runoff, motor emissions, microplastics, and contaminated groundwater. We are involuntarily taking in heavy metals on a daily basis. We're talking about lead, cadmium, and arsenic.
Let's break down the pathology of that. What exactly do positively charged heavy metal particles do once they get inside our cells? Why are they so dangerous?
They trigger massive cascading cellular oxidative stress. When these toxic metal ions enter your body, they generate highly reactive molecules called reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
Reactive oxygen species?
Yeah. Think of these ROS molecules like tiny erratic wrecking balls swinging wildly inside your cells. They deplete your natural antioxidant reserves, they cause lipid peroxidation, which essentially means they rust the delicate fats that make up your cell membranes, and they literally damage your DNA strands.
They just tear the cell apart?
Exactly. Furthermore, these heavy metals desperately want to bind to structural proteins and enzymes in your body, and when they do, they can completely shut down your mitochondrial function, depriving your cells of energy.
It sounds like microscopic sabotage. The metal gets in and just starts dismantling the cell from the inside out.
It really is.
But the research in our stack points out that the traditional Indian pantry house is the ultimate detox squad to fight this. It's nature's chelation team.
The structural chemistry here is beautiful. Let's look at curcumin again. Structurally, the curcumin molecule has what organic chemists call a beta-diketone moiety.
Which means what, practically, for the listener who isn't a chemist?
Think of it as a microscopic chemical claw. It has these oxygen atoms positioned just perfectly at a specific angle so that when a dangerous heavy metal particle like lead or cadmium floats by in the bloodstream, the curcumin claw magnetically snaps shut around it.
Oh,
It forms what is called a highly stable ketoenol chelate complex.
so it literally traps the heavy metal in a cage.
It sequesters it entirely. Once the metal is trapped inside that curcumin claw, it can no longer bind to your cellular tissue. It is rendered biologically inert, and your body can safely clear it through your bile or urine without it causing any oxidative damage.
That is incredible. But curcumin isn't fighting this battle alone. The stack mentions garlic and coriander as critical components of this defense system as well.
Yes, garlic is an absolute powerhouse here. It contains an organosulfur compound called allicin, which is what gives garlic its pungent smell.
Okay, allicin.
Allicin is packed with functional sulfhydryl groups. These are chemical groups made of a sulfur atom bonded to a hydrogen atom. Now, here is the vulnerability of heavy metals. Things like cadmium and lead have a profoundly high binding affinity for sulfur. They are magnetically irresistibly attracted to it.
Wait, if heavy metals love sulfur, and my cellular enzymes contain sulfur, are you telling me my garlic chicken curry is literally acting as a microscopic hazmat suit?
It absolutely is. Because you have all this allicin from the digested garlic floating through your bloodstream, the heavy metals bind to the sulfur in the allicin instead of binding to the vulnerable sulfur in your own cellular enzymes.
Oh my God.
The garlic acts as a sacrificial decoy, soaking up the heavy metals and preventing them from triggering cell death in your kidneys, your liver, and your neural tissues.
A sacrificial decoy. That is brilliant. And what about coriander?
Coriander, or cilantro, swoops in to finish the job. Bioactive extracts from coriander actually facilitate the rapid urinary excretion of the lead. They flush the trapped metals out through the kidneys and significantly reduce their deposition into your bone matrix, where lead normally likes to hide for decades.
It's a perfectly coordinated tactical defense. Curcumin forms the claw to trap the metal, garlic acts as a decoy to protect the cells, and coriander flushes the neutralized threat out of the system.
And it gets even deeper than direct physical chelation. Beyond just trapping the metals, these spices act as a biological tripwire to activate a deeply embedded ancient cellular defense system known as the NRF2 pathway.
The NRF2 antioxidant signaling pathway. I've actually seen this mentioned in longevity research. Walk us through this, because it sounds like pure sci-fi.
It is essentially your cell's emergency broadcast system. Under normal, healthy conditions, a protein called NRF2 is anchored in the cellular fluid by another protein called KEAP1, keeping it dormant and inactive.
Just waiting.
Right. But when bioactive compounds like curcumin or the sulfur from garlic enter the cell, they disrupt that complex. The NRF2 breaks free from its anchor, travels directly into the nucleus of your cell, and binds to specific sequences of your DNA called antioxidant response elements.
And what does binding to the DNA actually achieve?
It turns on a genetic switch. It forces your own DNA to synthesize massive amounts of endogenous glutathione and other powerful protective enzymes.
Wait, it forces the body to make its own antioxidants.
Exactly. It is literally upregulating your body's innate biological defense mechanism, forcing your cells to build their own molecular armor against the oxidative stress caused by the heavy metals.
So the food isn't just delivering passive antioxidants. It's actively commanding your cells to build more antioxidants on their own. That is the true definition of a biohack.
Precisely. We are using dietary inputs to rewrite cellular behavior. And speaking of commanding biology to do the heavy lifting for us, we need to transition from external environmental toxins to the internal environment, the microbiome.
Oh, yeah.
Let's bring this deep dive back to where we started with the Idli and Dosa.
Right, because earlier we established that the ancient 10th century versions of these dishes were heavy, unfermented blocks of lentil paste glued together by arabinocollectan polymers. But somewhere between the 13th and 15th centuries, cooks figured out the absolute magic of the overnight soak.
Which is where the real science happens.
They started leaving the ground, raw rice, and urad dal batter out overnight in the warm, humid, ambient Indian climate.
Which happens to be the perfect incubator for wild fermentation. And this intentional shift wasn't just about developing a sour flavor profile. It is a profound microbial transformation of the food matrix itself. This spontaneous fermentation is driven primarily by wild, surface-level organisms that naturally live on the husks of the raw, unpolished black gram seeds and rice grains.
Introduce us to the hero bacterium in this story, who is doing the work while the cook sleeps.
The absolute heavy lifter during the first 12 to 14 hours of that overnight soak is a bacterium called Leuconostoc mesenteroides.
Okay, Leuconostoc mesenteroides. What is this specific bacteria doing inside my dosa batter at 2 a.m.?
It is feasting. This bacterium metabolizes the soluble carbohydrates present in the ground pulses. It's what microbiologists call heterofermentative, which is just a fancy technical way of saying it doesn't just produce one single byproduct, it multitasks.
Multitasking bacteria, I like it.
As it eats the sugars, it produces lactic acid, a little bit of ethanol, and most importantly for the texture, carbon dioxide gas. Now, remember those mucilaginous arabinogalactam polymers from the Irad doll we talked about earlier? The sticky nets?
Yes, the natural edible glue that holds the ancient unfermented brick together.
Right. As the Leuconostoc mesenteroids bacteria exhale carbon dioxide gas, those sticky protein nets trap the tiny gas bubbles. This naturally fluffs and aerates the dense batter, causing it to double or triple in volume and providing that light, airy, incredible sponge-like texture for the eyelid, entirely without the need for chemical leavening agents like baking soda or yeast.
So the lentil provides the physical balloon, and the bacteria provide the helium to inflate it.
That is a perfect analogy. But the bacteria aren't just making it fluffy and delicious. While they are producing gas, they are also performing microscopic alchemy to destroy anti-nutrients hidden in the grains.
Right. This is crucial because raw grains and legumes have a built-in botanical defense mechanism called phytic acid. It's essentially the villain of this nutritional story.
Yes, phytic acid. Legumes and cereals use it to store phosphorus for the seed to grow. But in the human gut, phytic acid acts as an aggressive, indiscriminate chelator.
Meaning it grabs onto things.
Exactly. It aggressively binds to essential dietary minerals, specifically iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium. It locks them away into insoluble complexes so that your digestive tract cannot absorb them no matter how much of the food you eat.
So you could sit down and eat a massive bowl of raw grains and legumes, thinking you're being super healthy, and still be completely malnourished and deficient in iron and zinc because the phytic acid has those minerals on lockdown.
Exactly. It's a nutritional vault, and humans don't naturally produce the enzyme required to open it.
So we need help.
We do, but overnight fermentation provides the key. As our hero bacteria, Leuconostoc mesenteroids, produce lactic acid, they lower the pH of the batter, making it significantly more acidic, dropping it from around a neutral 6.0 down to a tart 4.4 to 4.7.
And what happens at that specific, highly acidic pH level?
That specific acidic environment activates specialized enzymes called phytases. Some of these phytases are endogenous, meaning they're already dormant inside the grains waiting for the right conditions, and some are secreted directly by the lactic acid bacteria themselves.
Okay, so the acid wakes them up.
Yes. And once activated by the acid, these phytase enzymes go to work like molecular scissors. They hack the phytic acid molecule to pieces.
They break the vault.
They completely dismantle the vault. They hydrolyze the phosphate ester bonds, destroying the phytic acid's ability to bind to anything. This unleashes all that locked up iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium directly into the batter. By the time you steam that idli or fry that dosa the next morning, those essential minerals are highly bioaccessible, ready to be instantly absorbed into your bloodstream. The bacteria also synthesize B-complex vitamins and enrich the overall amino acid profile. They transform a simple, hard-to-digest starch mixture into a highly bioactive, bioavailable, probiotic superfood matrix.
It's incredible. And what fascinates me, as someone who studies history, is how perfectly this modern microbiology aligns with classical ancient wisdom. If you look at classical Ayurveda foundational texts like the Charaka Samhita, they didn't have electron microscopes. They didn't know about Leuconostoc mesenteroids or the molecular scissors of phytase.
They were observing the effects.
Exactly. But they understood the physiological outcome of fermentation perfectly. They operated on the principle of ahara as oshada, which translates to food as medicine.
Right. Ancient Indian medicine viewed daily digestion as the absolute foundational pillar of holistic health.
Exactly. In Ayurveda, human health depends entirely on maintaining your agni, your internal metabolic or digestive fire, while keeping the three doshas vata, pitta, and kapha in harmonious balance. These ancient texts explicitly categorize properly fermented steam-cooked dishes like idli as lagu, meaning light and easy to digest, and spathya, meaning holistically wholesome.
Which aligns perfectly with the science of predigestion we just discussed. The bacteria do the heavy lifting so your gut doesn't have to.
It does. They noted that steam cooking preserves internal moisture and supports the agni digestive fire without provoking excessive internal heat, or pitta. And the natural sourness from the lactic acid fermentation balances erratic airy vata energy.
So they basically mapped the microbiome without seeing it.
Yes. Long before modern gut microbiology confirmed that fermented foods repair the gut mucosa and restore bowel motility, Ayurvedic physicians were prescribing these exact food matrices as targeted dietetic therapies. It's ancient gut microbiome therapy codified into a daily breakfast routine.
They observed the macro effects of the microbiology and successfully codified it into a generational dietary lifestyle. And the structural resilience of this ancient technology is so remarkably robust that it is literally leaving the planet.
This is, without a doubt, the craziest part of the deep dive. We started on the Silk Road 1,000 years ago, and we're ending with the ultimate time jump.
Yes. The Indian Defense Food Research Laboratory, the DFRL, has been tasked with creating highly specialized, stable food for human spaceflight missions. And when they looked for the perfect nutritional matrix, what did they turn to? The ancient Idli and Sambar.
No way.
They have successfully engineered space-certified, freeze-dried space Idlis and zero-gravity Sambar powders for astronauts to eat in orbit.
Because the baseline nutritional architecture of a fermented lentil and rice matrix is so perfectly optimized for human digestion, so undeniably nutrient-dense and so structurally stable, that it is literally space-grade technology. The dense 9th century Idlis that we read about in ancient Canada texts is literally going to orbit the Earth.
It proves that this culinary evolution isn't just cultural heritage or a quaint relic of the past. It is highly functional molecular innovation that stands up to the absolute rigors of modern zero-gravity scientific scrutiny.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's do a quick recap of the ground we've covered for everyone listening. We've traced the samosa from its origins as a rugged, meat-filled Central Asian saddlebag ration, all the way to its transformation via Portuguese potatoes into India's most beloved vegetarian street food.
We've seen how a 17th century Maratha king in a pinch accidentally birthed the sambar.
We've looked at the intense biochemical physics of Tadka, where flash-blooming hot lipids create curcumin micelles that evade the liver's bouncers and sneak straight into the lymphatic system.
We've learned that your garlic chicken and turmeric curries are essentially heavy metal hazmat suits, using sulfhydryl groups and diketone claws to trap and flush out urban pollutants.
And we've watched microscopic phytase hackers dismantle anti-nutrients inside fermented dosa batter, creating a superfood so biochemically efficient it's being sent to space.
It really changes how you look at a simple plate of food, doesn't it? Every spice, every technique, every overnight soak is a deliberate, calculated step in a millennia-old biochemical formula.
But before we sign off, I know you have one final provocative thought to leave us with. Something for everyone listening to mull over while they eat their next meal.
I do. We just talked about how modern science is using these ancient recipes to create space-grade food for astronauts. But what if the next evolution isn't culinary, but pharmaceutical? If traditional Tadka is the perfect lipid delivery system for hydrophobic molecules and fermented batters are the perfect enzymatic unlock key for minerals, what if the billion-dollar future of precision drug delivery isn't being developed in a sterile lab, but is actually hiding in the exact ratios of your grandmother's everyday spice box, just waiting for us to reverse engineer it?
That is a fascinating question. Are the cures to modern ailments already written into our ancestral cookbooks? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you look at your next plate of food not just as dinner, but as an absolute masterpiece of human bioengineering. Until next time.